Jason, I want to go to this last line from Greg, moving into product leadership. Anyone brand new to product management, I have taken a product management course, starting with a 101, not a 1010. This gives them grounding from where they can go to teach. You talked about how for you, you came into a product leadership role and you used it to give yourself that grounding. As you bring new product managers on, or you see new people come, what's the recommendations you give? Is that sort of the same standard?
Yeah, so there's two things. It really depends on budgets. I've always worked for kind of smaller organizations that, for some reason or another, are not a huge fan of formal training. At the very minimum, there are a couple books. I actually liked a book. I know it's very kind of simplified, but it's Product Management for Dummies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's really nice because in a very easy to understand, no theoretical, mumbo jumbo and algorithms. It's really kind of, this is what product management, this is the roles, this is what they do. So I'll at least get everybody who comes into an organization, product management, product owners, to read that book or have that book as a utility. Of course, the fight for them to get more formal training. It could be a bit of an upward battle, just because a lot of times HR or training departments, they just don't understand necessarily the benefit of this training. I'm not sure why. I think they prefer maybe more around IT centered training for like AWS training or something like that. Maybe that has a perception of more tangible results, but yeah, definitely fight for training programs. I would definitely recommend that. I have done that before when it was able, but at the very least, some intro to product management. I'll do, Inspired or something like that. Something that just gives an overall view of how a product management team should be organized in order to be most efficient. And then the most important piece, like we talked about earlier, John and Steve, is prioritization. Because as soon as a product manager gets thrown into the field, the requests are coming in, and that can be very daunting if they don't know how to handle and prioritize those. And so
triage skills.
Yeah, triage skills. I've done tuned in to kind of keep that kind of simple. Based on the organizations I was in. So getting them to appreciate how to do basic prioritization of those things. Yeah.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit more about sort of the divide with HR and professional development in some of our questions. But, it's key. John, you got something to say?
Yeah. So to build on what the end of that quote and then what Jason was talking about, the first time I was tasked with creating product management at a company, once I found my humans, we went through the pragmatic marketing class in 2011 together to give them some kind of a framework, a way of shared vocabulary and a way of thinking about it together as a team. Mm-hmm. And it was easier to get approval for, even though we were a relatively small company, because there was an alleged certification at the end. Like this, pretend stamp of approval, as opposed to just if I was paying for Udemy classes or something, right?
Yeah. No, we've got a white paper Steve and I have been working. I don't know if I shared it with either of you guys yet. We've started to share it with a couple people. And one of the things we found in our research was that a lot of training classes are purely for the certification. It's not, the people aren't worrying about even adding the skills to their portfolio. They're just trying to check that mark, get that shield, or get the CPEs if it's one of the professions that has those types of things.
Well, the crazy irony, I've done pragmatic marketing, I've done Scrum Alliance and the SAFe stuff. Mm-hmm. And in all cases, you go to the class, and at the end of the class, you get the certification. Like there's never, I guess it's SAFe, you have to take a test.
Mm-hmm. But most of the rest of them, test.
Is there a test in pragmatic?
Yeah.
I don't remember the test.
25 questions, 80%.
Not in 2010.
Yeah. Oh, so you
2011.
Yeah.
2011, I remember taking the test with my team. Actually, now that you said.
Well, now they've got 5 or 6 tests for each class.
Yeah, they have a test for each class.
I think that gives it slightly more gravitas and keeps you engaged if you know there's a reason you have to pay attention, because you won't get the certificate at the end. So
yeah, that's a good way to think about it. All right, the final page here. This was actually from Rob Goldberg when he made his transition from Wall Street to product, and I was hoping to be on here so I could make fun of why would you leave Wall Street and go into product, but. Especially in the late 80s, he had the honor of working with really strong product people at Pirelli Tires to pattern himself. Didn't know anything about product. They helped him take his analytical skills to apply them. And then his transformation came at Duracell, where he had some really great coaching and mentoring. And then he actually went on to teach. And this is see one, do one, teach one as a great process. It actually, there was some follow-up conversation with Greg and I on this one. Maybe one of the topics we need to do is product management for software versus product management for consumer or other hard goods, and the differences, because, you know, I see Rob and I think he works at a big software company, and his start was at a battery company and a tire company in product management. So, you know, some of those skills which are going to transfer regardless of your form factor and medium and what you're doing. I thought it was interesting. And his quote made me really think about what we used to attribute to Ben Franklin. And I did my research, as I always do, to find sourcing, and it's more of a Chinese proverb. Tell me and I will forget, show me and I will remember, involve me and I will understand. And through each of the stuff we talked about, to me, it seems like that's a key thing. The more we can get people engaged, learn from a project, have a mentor, engage people and work on applying it, that's going to be a key part of what's going on. Steve, what's your take?
Well, you know, I have a strong software background, of course. I mean, my whole career. And as I'm doing courseware development now, I do find myself sliding so easily into referring to developers or, you know, referring to software. And yet one of my favorite projects over the last 5 years is working with a life sciences company, and they don't have software. I mean, you know, everything we talked about, I'm like, I don't know if this applies here. And they're like, oh yeah, it totally does. I mean, you know, we have customers and we have requirements and we tell stories and we have problems that we're trying to solve. And, you know, just the whole language of it applied to a non-software business. And yet even as I, you know, talk about it, I'm always, you know, I'm skewing towards software in the way I talk about things. So it's almost like we could go through my courseware again with a different instructor who had a, you know, hard goods background, and they could use the same slides. They would just tell different stories.
Yeah. No, a lot of, and some of the stuff I do with smaller companies through my speaking at Vistage and stuff is taking pure product management concepts and making them relevant to a CEO owner of a $10 million business. They don't call it product management.
I did a gig with a really cool company called Laird. They make remote controls for trains. So imagine, you know, you're trying to put together a train. You've got cars all over the train yard. In the old days, you'd have to run over to these various trains. Now you stand up in a tower with a remote control and you just move the engines around and fetch the cars that you need. And I'm like, this is so cool.
That sounds like a
game. Every 8-year-old boy's dream.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And yet, you know, there were all sorts of interesting stories in there, like if you drop the remote or if you fall down, all brakes on all things lock, because you don't want a car just, you know, wandering through the train yard, you know, and yet in the end, you know, it was fascinating discussion, but in the end it was like, hey, wait, it's the same thing. It's still personas and problems and, you know, whatever. And I was doing a session with their leadership, and afterwards the head of HR came over and said, could you give this same speech to my HR team? And I'm like, why? What do you people do? I mean, I thought all HR did was cut our benefits every year and protect the executives from sexual harassment suits. And she said, well, you know, we do that, but we also do some other things. And so I ended up speaking with the HR team, and they were like, you know what? We have these same things, right? We have personas that we're serving, our employees and our communities. And, you know, it was just fascinating that the language of what I think of as the language of software product management is really just the language of, I don't know, management.
Yeah, solving problems and solutions. I mean, Steve, you know, I in my work with HR executives in my previous job, I sat in meetings. I'm like, wait, they're talking about agile, they're talking about requirements, they're talking about, you know, segmentation. It really resonated with me.